In the quiet corners of our world, there are stories that unfold in silence. They are tales not of grand adventure, but of internal battles waged within the human soul. The story of Randy Stair is one such tale. It begins not with a bang, but with a flicker. The pale, ethereal glow of a computer screen in a darkened room in Pennsylvania. Here, a young man known to the world as Randy lived a life of quiet desperation. He worked a night job at a local grocery store, a seemingly ordinary existence. Yet behind this facade of normalcy, another identity was taking shape, a persona he called Andrew Blaze. This was the name he gave to the part of himself that yearned for something more, something beyond the mundane reality he inhabited. This division of self was not merely a playful escape, it was a symptom of a deeper fracture within his psyche. Randy struggled, as many do, with feelings of isolation and depression. He wrestled with questions of identity, feeling like a soul misplaced, a spirit confined to a form that did not feel like his own. In his private journals, he wrote of feeling like a female soul trapped within a male body, a profound and painful dissonance that colored his every waking moment. The world outside offered no easy answers, no simple solace for this deep-seated turmoil. So, he turned inward, not to the depths of his own spirit for healing, but to the glowing world of fiction, a world he could control. It is a fundamental human need to seek connection, to find a tribe, a place where one feels understood. For Randy Stair, this connection was not found in the world of flesh and blood. It was discovered in the animated realm of a children's cartoon, Danny Phantom. This fiction became his sanctuary, his cathedral. Within its colorful lines and simple narratives, he found a character who seemed to speak directly to the chaos within him. This character, a ghost musician named Ember McLean, became the focal point of his existence. He saw in her a kindred spirit, a rebel, an outcast who commanded attention through her art. She was everything he felt he was not: powerful, seen, and eternal. This initial fascination, this simple act of fandom, began to morph into something far more consuming. The line between appreciation and obsession started to blur, slowly at first, then, with alarming speed. The world of Andrew Blaze, his online avatar, became more real, more vibrant than the world of Randy Stair. It was a universe he constructed with meticulous detail, a digital stage where he was the director, the writer, and the hero. Here, he could escape the quiet desperation of his night shifts and the internal conflicts that plagued him. He was no longer just Randy, the stalker at Weiss Market. He was Andrew Blaze, the destined partner of a phantom, on the cusp of a grand, dark adventure. Idolatry is an ancient concept. It is the act of placing one's ultimate faith and devotion in something other than the divine. It is the worship of the created over the creator. For Randy Stair, the idol was not carved from stone or wood. It was forged from pixels and sound waves. Ember McLean, the rebellious ghost from Danny Phantom, became his goddess. Her fictional backstory, her animated angst, and her catchy, defiant songs resonated with the discord in his own soul. He did not merely like the character, he began to venerate her. He saw her not as a piece of entertainment, but as a real entity, a being waiting for him in another dimension, a ghostly plane he desperately wanted to reach. This was not a simple crush or a passing fancy. It was a spiritual transfer, the energy, the hope, and the longing that one might direct toward a higher power or even toward building a real life. Randy poured into this fictional construct. He created an elaborate online world, a series he called Ember's Ghost Squad. In this world, he and Ember were partners, leading a team of spectral rebels. It was a universe built around his obsession, a place where his fantasies of power, recognition, and belonging were made manifest. He spent countless hours creating animations, writing scripts, and building this digital monument to his idol, a testament to the depth of his delusion. The danger of such an idol is that it offers no real guidance, it provides no moral compass. A fictional character, by its very nature, is a reflection of its creator's script, not a source of transcendent wisdom. Ember McLean was designed to be a charismatic antagonist, a rebel ghost. Her core message was one of selfish desire and control. You will remember my name. This became Randy's mantra. He adopted her fictional motivations as his own. He believed that by committing a grand, terrible act, he would not only join her in the afterlife, but also achieve the recognition he so desperately craved. His idol demanded a sacrifice, and he began to plan how he would provide it. The idolatry consumed his thinking. It twisted his understanding of life and death. In his mind, suicide was not an end, but a transition, a doorway to a better existence with Ember. And murder? It was a necessary, even noble, part of the plan. He believed that by taking others with him, he was fulfilling a twisted destiny laid out in the lore he had created for himself. The real people around him, his co-workers at the Weiss Market, became less than human. They were reduced to supporting characters, obstacles, or collateral damage in the epic saga of Andrew Blaze and Ember McLean. His idol offered no path to redemption, only a path to destruction. The human mind has a remarkable capacity for self-deception. When faced with unbearable pain or confusion, it can construct alternate realities, elaborate fantasies that serve as a shield against the harshness of the world. For Randy Stair, this shield became a prison. His online world, Ember's Ghost Squad, was no longer just an escape. It was his primary reality. The long, quiet hours of his night shift at the Weiss Market provided fertile ground for this fixation to grow. Surrounded by the silent aisles and humming freezers, he was left alone with his thoughts, and his thoughts were consumed by Ember and the violent destiny he was scripting for himself. His online presence became a detailed chronicle of his descent. He left behind a vast digital trail, journals, videos, and manifestos that documented his meticulous planning. This was not a crime of passion, a sudden snap. It was a cold, calculated project that he developed over several months. He spoke to his webcam as if it were a confidant, laying out his motivations and his growing resolve. In a video posted in May 2017, just weeks before the attack, he showed the world the 2 shotguns he had purchased. He had named them, engraved them, and spoke of them with a chilling sense of purpose. The fantasy was acquiring its tools. The digital plan was preparing to cross the threshold into physical reality. This spiral was fueled by a profound sense of alienation. He admitted in his final messages that he had been a good liar, hiding his severe depression from those who might have helped. He rejected the idea of therapy, viewing it as an obstacle to his plan. His isolation was a feedback loop. His obsession pushed people away, and the resulting loneliness drove him deeper into his obsession. He felt misunderstood, particularly regarding his struggles with gender identity. Instead of seeking community or support, he embraced a narrative of ultimate rejection. He would reject the world before it could reject him further, and he would do it in a way that would force the world to remember his name. The final dedication of his work reveals the dark influences he chose to embrace. He dedicated his final animated project, which depicted a school massacre, to the perpetrators of the Columbine shooting. He saw them not as tragic, misguided youths, but as pioneers, figures to be emulated. He was curating his own legacy, aligning himself with a history of violence. The obsession with a cartoon ghost had now intertwined with the real-world horrors of mass murder. The spiral had reached its lowest point. The boundary between the fictional violence he created online and the real violence he was about to unleash had completely dissolved. All that remained was to set the date. The night of June 7, 2017, began like any other at the Weiss Market in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania. The last customers left, the doors were locked, and the small overnight crew began their work. For Randy Stair, this was not just another shift. It was the culmination of everything he had been planning. It was the premiere of his final, terrible performance. As he went about his tasks, a chilling calm had settled over him. The years of depression, the internal turmoil, the obsessive planning, it had all led to this single point in time. The end of his story in this world was the beginning of what he believed would be his true story in the next. He had left his final messages for the world to find. He posted a last video, a farewell note that laid bare his intentions. He left a separate message for his parents, a final, hollow admission of the pain he had hidden for so long. These were the last digital breadcrumbs of a life lived increasingly online, a life that was about to violently intersect with the physical world. As he worked alongside his colleagues, he saw them not as people, but as part of the set. They were unaware that they were standing on a stage, and that the final act, written by the quiet stalker beside them, was about to begin. As the clock ticked past midnight, moving into the early hours of June 8th, Randy began to put his plan into motion. He used his employee knowledge of the store to his advantage. He gathered wooden pallets, the same pallets he would normally use for stocking shelves, and began to block the entrances and exits. Each pallet slid into place was another bar on the cage he was constructing. He was sealing the building, transforming a place of commerce into a tomb. The mundane tools of his unremarkable job were now being repurposed into instruments of a massacre. The quiet of the store was no longer peaceful. It was the heavy silence before a storm. With the exits blocked, the trap was set. He retrieved the 2 pistol-grip shotguns he had brought with him, the ones he had named and shown to the world online. The weight of the weapons in his hands must have felt like the ultimate confirmation of his purpose. The fantasy was now tangible, cold, and heavy. Andrew Blaze, the hero of Ember's Ghost Squad, was fully manifest in the form of Randy Stair, the Night Stalker. The store, his workplace for nearly 7 years, was now the designated location for a ritual of violence and suicide, a blood sacrifice to a phantom idol. The final shift was about to end in a hail of gunfire. Shortly before 1 in the morning, the sterile silence of the Weiss market was shattered. The first gunshot was a deafening roar, an impossible sound in a place of quiet night work. Randy Stair, now fully committed to his role, began his rampage. He moved through the familiar aisles, not stalking shelves, but hunting his colleagues. He fired 59 shots in total. Each blast was a punctuation mark in the horrific manifesto he had been writing for months. The violence was not random or chaotic in his mind. It was methodical, a grim checklist he needed to complete before his own planned exit. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the echoes of unimaginable terror. 3 people, his co-workers, could not escape his predetermined path of destruction. Terry Sterling, 63 years old. Victoria Brong, just 26. Brian Hayes, 47. They were not characters in a story. They were real people, with families, histories, and futures that were stolen from them in a matter of minutes. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, targeted not for who they were, but for what they represented in Randy's twisted narrative, a means to an end, a sacrifice for his perceived glory. Their final moments were filled with a horror that no one should ever have to face, their lives extinguished by a co-worker lost to a delusional world. In the midst of the carnage, a moment of inexplicable mercy occurred. A 4th co-worker, a young woman, was also present. She was wearing headphones, a small detail that perhaps saved her life by muffling the initial sounds and giving her a few precious seconds. She looked up and saw the horror unfolding. She saw Randy shoot one of the victims. Their eyes met. In that moment, Randy Stair, the killer, looked directly at her, raised his weapon, and then, for reasons that will never be fully known, he turned and walked away. He spared her life. This single act of restraint, so at odds with the rest of his plan, is a haunting question mark in a night of terrible certainties. After ensuring he had fulfilled his grim quota, Randy turned the weapon on himself. The final gunshot was the one he had planned all along. It was his self-authored climax, his grand exit. He believed this act would transport him to the ghostly dimension of his idol, where he would be welcomed as a hero by Ember McLean. In the chilling silence that followed, the only survivor, hidden and terrified, found the courage to escape the sealed building and call 911. The massacre was over. The physical violence had ended, but the echoes of those gunshots would reverberate forever in the lives of the families, the survivor, and the community he had shattered. For Randy Stair, the world ended with the pull of a trigger. A flash of light, a roar, and then nothing. The cold tiled floor of the Weiss market was the last thing his body would ever know. The meticulously planned massacre, the final act of Andrew Blaze, was complete. The sirens wailed in the distance, a sound he would never hear. Police and paramedics would soon breach the doors he had sealed, finding a scene of incomprehensible violence. But for the consciousness, the soul of Randy Stair, this was not the end. It was a transition, though not the one he had so confidently envisioned. He did not awaken in a neon-drenched, spectral concert hall. There was no greeting from a rebellious ghost with flaming blue hair. The world of Ember's Ghost Squad, the universe he had poured his entire being into, was gone. It had vanished like the dream it always was. In its place was a profound and unnerving stillness. It was not a void of nothingness, but a space filled with an immense, silent presence. The colors were gone. The sounds were gone. The elaborate fictions he had built around himself were stripped away, layer by layer, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth of his spirit. In this place, he was no longer Randy Stair, the quiet stalker. He was no longer Andrew Blaze, the fictional anti-hero. These names, these constructs, had no meaning here. All that remained was the essence of the choices he had made. Every hidden thought, every secret journal entry, every moment of obsessive planning, and every violent act was laid bare. There were no avatars to hide behind, no digital screens to filter his reality. He was utterly and completely exposed, not to the judgment of the world he had left behind, but to a judgment far more absolute and penetrating. He stood in a great quiet, a silence that was not empty, but full of weight and significance. It was the silence of accountability. The life he had just ended, and the lives he had taken, were not just a story that was over. They were an account that was now due, the grand narrative he had written for himself, with its promise of a glorious afterlife with his phantom bride, dissolved into the ether. What replaced it was a terrifyingly simple reality. He was a soul, standing before the precipice of eternity, and he was about to be asked to answer for the blood on his hands and the idol in his heart. The stillness coalesced into a form, a presence of pure, unbearable light. It was not a courtroom of wood and stone, but a tribunal of absolute truth. Before this light, which some might call God, or Jesus, the soul of Randy Stair stood naked and exposed. There were no lawyers, no jury of his peers. The evidence was his life itself, every moment played back not as a memory, but as a present reality. The defense he had so carefully constructed in his manifestos, the justifications rooted in his pain and his fictional world, crumbled into dust. They were meaningless here. The only thing that mattered was the truth. The first charge presented itself without a single word being spoken. It was the crime of idolatry. The court of eternity was not concerned with cartoons. It was concerned with the misplacement of worship. The soul of Randy Stair saw, with a clarity he never had in life, how he had taken a fictional character and elevated her to the status of a deity. He had poured his devotion, his faith, and his very soul into a phantom. He had loved the creation more than the creator. He had listened to the whispers of a fictional ghost instead of the eternal laws of morality and love written on every human heart. He saw his obsession for what it was, a profound spiritual betrayal. Next, the weight of his violence descended upon him. He was made to feel the final moments of his victims. He felt the terror of Terry Sterling, the confusion of Brian Hayes, the stolen future of Victoria Brong. It was not a video or a news report. It was a direct spiritual experience of the suffering he had caused. He felt the unending grief of their families, the ripple of pain that spread out from his actions like a shockwave. He understood, in that moment, the infinite value of each life he had extinguished. They were not NPCs in his game. They were children of God, and their blood cried out from the ground. Finally, he was confronted with the act of his own suicide. He had seen it as a triumphant escape, a portal to his desired reality. But here, in the light of truth, he saw it as the ultimate act of despair and pride. It was the final rejection of the gift of life. It was his last statement that his own plan was superior to any divine plan. He had chosen to be his own God, the arbiter of his own life and the lives of others. In the silent court of eternity, his actions were not seen as a tragic consequence of mental illness, but as a series of deliberate choices made by a soul that had turned its back on the light, choosing instead a fantasy of darkness and death. The presence of light, the ultimate judge, finally broke the silence. The voice was not a sound that entered the ears, but a truth that resonated in the very core of Randy's soul. It was a voice of perfect justice, yet tinged with an eternal sorrow. It asked not for excuses, but for an accounting. The theme of accountability became paramount. I gave you a life, the present seemed to communicate. I gave you free will, the capacity to choose between love and hate, between creation and destruction. What did you do with these gifts? You were given pain, yes, but you chose to multiply it, not transform it. You were given loneliness, but you chose to forge a covenant with death instead of seeking life. The concept of repentance was laid before him. In this moment of ultimate clarity, Randy's soul could see the path he could have taken. He saw the moments where he could have reached out for help, where he could have rejected the violent fantasies, where he could have chosen a different way. He saw therapy not as an obstacle but as a lifeline he had refused. He saw community not as a source of judgment, but as a potential source of healing he had scorned. True repentance, the court made clear, was not simply regretting the consequences, it was a deep, sorrowful turning away from the sin itself, a turning he had refused to make at every critical juncture of his life. Divine justice, he learned, was not about anger or vengeance. It was about consequence. It was the natural, spiritual law of the universe. As gravity pulls a stone to the earth, so do choices pull a soul toward its ultimate destination. His choices, to worship an idol, to nurture hatred, to meticulously plan murder, and to destroy life, had forged a character within him. They had shaped his soul into a form that was incompatible with the light. The justice was not an external punishment being inflicted upon him, but the inevitable outcome of the path he himself had so deliberately carved. He had sown violence, and now he was reaping the spiritual harvest. The voice of judgment explored the depths of his idolatry. You looked for salvation in a shadow, it communicated. You gave your heart to an echo and your future to a fantasy. This idol you created could offer you nothing, because it was nothing. It demanded violence, and you obeyed. It promised a lie, and you believed. You turned away from the source of all life to embrace a phantom of your own making. You sought to be remembered, but you chose to be remembered for destruction. This was your choice. This was your will. And a will, once forged, has an eternal trajectory. The weight of these truths was absolute, leaving no room for argument or self-deception. The reckoning was complete. The soul of Randy Stair stood, stripped of all its earthly illusions. The Andrew Blaze persona was a faded memory. The promise of Ember McLean was a bitter, hollow echo. All that was left was the stark reality of his choices and the immutable character they had forged. The presence of light, the source of all that is good and holy, rendered its verdict. It was not delivered with a gavel's fall or a thunderous decree. It was a simple, sorrowful, and absolute statement of spiritual fact. He had by his own hand and will made himself an enemy of love, of life, and of light. The verdict was guilty. Guilty of idolatry. Guilty of murder. Guilty of rejecting the gift of life. And because he had never sought true repentance, because he had embraced his sins until the very end, there was no appeal. He had built his own hell in his heart long before he pulled the trigger, and now he was being consigned to the place he had chosen. The light did not cast him out in anger. Instead, the light began to recede, or rather his soul found itself unable to bear the light any longer. It was a separation born of incompatibility. Darkness cannot exist in the presence of pure light. He was cast into a state of being that was the perfect reflection of his choices. It was an existence defined by separation, separation from God, from light, from love, and from life. It was a place of eternal consequence, where the memory of his crimes was not a fading event, but a constant burning reality. He had wanted to be with his phantom idol, and in a way, he received his wish. He was left alone with the nothingness he had worshipped, an eternity spent with the echo of his own selfish desires, a world without love, without hope, without redemption. It was the ultimate, tragic fulfillment of his mantra: he would be remembered, but only by the eternal darkness he had embraced. The story of Randy Stair serves as a solemn, thought-provoking parable for our modern age. It is a grim reminder of the dangers of untreated mental illness, the corrosive power of isolation, and the seductive nature of idolatry in all its forms. It compels us to reflect on the nature of morality, the weight of our choices, and the reality of consequence. His life, and his end, stand as a tragic monument to a soul that chose a phantom over reality, destruction over creation, and a self-made hell over the possibility of redemption. It is a door that was locked from the inside, a final eternal consequence of a will turned against its own creator. Only Jesus Christ can save.